You slandered me on TV.
Stop.
And you perjured yourself with
Stop.
this because she's not Fernandez. So there you go. You want to fight it? Go for it. Prove to us that she's Zenaida Fernandez-Gonzalez.
I'm going to cut to your chase right now so you can get away with all these questions.
Right. Well.
That's right, well. So that's a sore subject between you and I. So
Excuse me,
we can
I'm
badger all day long with
Just a
that.
second,
his-
folks. Listen. Question?
You open the door.
No, sir. Be quiet.
It was very traumatic for me, and it's still very traumatic for me. I get bits and pieces of stuff that continues to come back to me in my memory.
Al Burr's under oath from Casey Anthony's parents during some pretrial testimony in the case against their daughter. We're now just 14 days, 2 weeks, folks, from the start of her murder trial. And today we're focusing on the two key witnesses that will be taking the stand during the trial, Mom and Dad, George and Cindy Anthony. What will they say? How will they act? And how could their testimony do damage to either the defense or the prosecution? Back with me now, criminal defense attorney Roger Scott down in Orlando, criminal defense attorney Midwin Charles, and criminologist Casey Jordan, who's also a contributor for In Session on our sister network, True TV. Casey, are there two witnesses who are more important in this case? There's going to be scientific evidence, there's going to be experts, there's going to be investigators, but is there anyone more important than George and Cindy Anthony in this case?
You know, from a juror's perspective, and really that's all that matters, Vinny, I think you're right. I think there are no two other more important witnesses than George and Cindy. They have had a lot of media spotlight on them in the last few years. I really do feel for them. If they seem defiant and angry, it's because they've been put under a microscope. And they're, they had nothing to do with this. But again, that being stuck between a rock and a hard place, they can be defiant in a deposition, but it is going to be extremely important when they get on the stand. I think you're going to see them walk a very fine tightrope between protecting their daughter and still doing the right thing by Kaylee.
Well, and that's some tightrope you're talking about there, Casey. Now, March 2nd, George Anthony was testifying, and here things got a little dicey between him and the prosecutor. Take a look.
Amber Alert, you name it, that should have been done, and it wasn't.
Right. Well.
That's right, well. So that's a sore subject between you and I. So we can badger all day long with
Just a
that.
second, folks. Listen. Question?
You open the door.
No, sir. Be quiet. Question, then answer. Don't talk over each other. Question.
Yes, sir.
Well, again, just a few moments ago, you brought up about...
Yes?
Let me explain something to you. I can give you a yes
Your
to
Honor,
a point.
I'm going to object to him answering.
What is your objection?
I would request that the witness be allowed to finish his answer.
All right, Roger Scott, I got to ask you, how is that going to play in a courtroom? You got the prosecutor who's kind of going after George Anthony there a little bit, trying to get him to answer. Everyone understands this is someone who's lost his granddaughter, but they also understand that his daughter's the one who's being blamed here. That little exchange we saw there, if that's the way it's going to be at trial, is this a good prosecution witness or a bad prosecution witness?
Well, I would say good for the prosecution. The prosecution wants this to be an emotional trial, where the defense would want it to be analytical. And the more that there's a fight between the witness and the lawyer, then the Anthonys aren't sympathetic at all, and they're unlikable. So that may actually help the prosecution. And
That's very interesting. Now, there was another part, and Midwin, I want you to pay close attention here. March 3rd, George Anthony still on the stand in preliminary hearing. Here, it's a whole different emotion we see from George.
You loved your granddaughter more than anything in the world.
Yes.
And you would have done anything to help find her.
Yes.
And you love your daughter more than anything in the world.
Yes.
And you would do anything to protect her.
Yes.
She is your baby.
Look at that emotion from George Anthony, Midwin. All right, and we're going to see that. I think we're going to see that at the trial. I find it impossible for George Anthony and Cindy Anthony to get on the stand at this trial and not get emotional like that. Here, though, the defense, Jose Baez, is the one questioning George.
That's right. I mean, I think no one is going to disagree with the fact that George and Cindy here are also victims. They have lost their granddaughter, and I think any emotion that is seen by the jury, I think they're going to understand it. I don't think that they're going to count it against them. Even that exchange you played earlier where that prosecutor was kind of riding him because the prosecution didn't like his answers, jurors are going to connect with that and recognize, like, wait a minute, you're not giving this guy a fair shake. So I think this case is going to be about emotion, and Cindy and George are going to play key roles in this trial. There's no question about that.
Well, let me throw this out now. What if this jury is convinced that George and Cindy Anthony, and I don't think they believe Casey Anthony committed this murder, what if this jury's convinced that George and Cindy, who you termed are also victims here, who loved Caylee as much as anyone, if they don't believe the right person is on trial, what sort of impact does that have on the jury? For instance, take a look now at this footage now. You've got Cindy Anthony finishing her testimony, getting off the stand, and mouthing, "I love you," to her daughter, Casey, and we'll show that to you in just a moment. Okay. But if that's happening, if she's getting off the stand and mouthing, "I love you," Midwin, how does that impact all of this, these incredible dynamics inside the courtroom? If a jury is watching that and saying, "My goodness, Grandma loves the person on trial who was accused of killing this beautiful granddaughter, Caylee," does that give the defense some hope that maybe a jury will say, "Hey, Grandma doesn't believe this. Why should we?"
You know, I think that's a good point, but I think you have to remember jurors are people too. They're going to be parents on this jury, they're going to be people with siblings, and they're going to understand that sometimes people are placed in conflicting positions, right? Here, Cindy and George are the parents of their daughter who is on trial for killing their grandchild. That's a conflict that I think a lot of jurors are going to probably understand going into this trial.
Casey Jordan, there's been other reactions, and we saw, you know, Cindy mouthing, "I love you." We've seen George get off the stand and be completely ignored by Casey Anthony. Now, the jury's going to see all of this, you know, what those dynamics are, and I got to think they're going to wonder about it. How do you think that plays if you have something quite the opposite of "I love you," which is, "I'm not even going to look at you. I'm not even going to look at you, Dad. You just testify. I'm not going to look at you." What does the jury do with that?
Yeah, there's no doubt that if they will pick up on that if it happens at trial. And jurors are extremely fine-tuned to those nuances of emotion that Midwin talks about at trial. They can be instructed all day long about the letter of the law. Don't be swayed by this, don't be swayed by that, just follow the letter of the law. But we know from jury research that in the end, they gauge facial expressions, they gauge those silent glances. And it's true that if there seems to be dissension between Casey and her father, and then maybe even some connection between Casey and her mother, that will confuse them and perhaps even divide them about whether the parents believe their daughter is innocent or not.
Roger, we just have a few seconds left here, but if you're sitting in Jose Baez's seat, do you talk to Casey Anthony about what she should do when her parents are on the stand, whether she should look, not look, acknowledge, not acknowledge?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be critical. The jury watches everything.
What do you tell her?
The defendant does. You tell her to act like a normal person, which will be tough. Like, she does love her parents, but they're in a difficult position. Of course, she wants the jury to believe that they're all victims of this, and she had nothing to do with it. So she does want to have a connection with her parents.
So, all right, so what you're telling me is don't ignore Mom and Dad. All right, we'll see how this plays out. Fascinating stuff. Roger, great to see you. Midwin Charles, fantastic job. Casey Jordan, thank you.